Hi, thank you for coming, everyone. My name is Scott Jon Siegel. This is a talk about the design of games, but it's also a talk about the design of development. I've been working in the casual game space as a designer for the last 9 years, and during that time I've seen a lot of different processes in place. I've designed and worked on games that have seen massive success, games that haven't, and games that never shipped. And you learn a lot from being a part of success, but I've come to find you actually learn a lot more being intimately involved in failure. And maybe the most important thing I've learned is that failure is unavoidable. But the trick to game development, maybe any creative process, is to anticipate and plan for that failure and create for yourself the opportunity to learn from it and try again. And learning from failure is actually a facet of many of my favorite games. Games create a space in which failure is not just permitted, but often a part of the mastery process. Games like Super Hexagon, Flappy Bird, or even AAA titles like the Dark Souls series, proficiency builds from successive failures. And to quote Jake the dog, sucking at something is the first step to being sort of good at something. But I don't think many companies today are designed to anticipate failure or even learn from it. And my time in the social, mobile, casual, free-to-play game industry has shown me that fear of failure often leads to a risk-averse strategy, a notion that the safest way to avoid failure is to only do the things that are proven to work. But companies that stick with these so-called fast follows are at perpetual risk of stagnation, because the company is not built to try new things. The industry as a whole relies on what's established, what's proven, these best practices to try and guarantee that the thing they're making is similar enough to the successful thing that someone else made. And I don't think this is necessarily a sound strategy, and I've watched companies spend years developing something safe only to have it ultimately underperform, failing to pull audiences away from the multitude of similar games in the App Store. What's more, the fallacy of sunk cost leads companies to double down on struggling development. Aggressive staffing, mid-production design pivots, pulling resources from other projects, pushing release to the next quarter or the next quarter, all ways of throwing more and more money and time at a problem, all in the name of avoiding failure. All because we're an industry that focuses on what worked and not enough on what didn't or what it took to get to a thing that worked. And the story of success is always a story about failure, just most folks only read the last chapter. Now, we all know King asserted their reign over casual games with Candy Crush Saga in 2012, but before they were King.com, a games portal with a litany of casual titles, and a strong community whose metrics would help King determine which of their games to further develop and move to other platforms. Candy Crush was actually the third game that King moved to Facebook, and the first one they moved to mobile. And others would follow, but most didn't. Back in 2009, Rovio made their mark in casual games with Angry Birds. But Rovio also shipped 51 other games before Angry Birds, and would have risked bankruptcy had the game not succeeded. That same year, PopCap shipped Plants vs. Zombies, which went on to become a massive success. But the leadership at PopCap at the time didn't expect Plants vs. Zombies to be successful. It was too strange and unlike other things for them to believe it could capture a large enough audience. Regardless, they gave its small team the time and space they needed to develop it and ship it, knowing that the company would remain afloat even if the weird, risky thing they tried didn't pan out. Even if PVZ had been DOA, PopCap would have moved on smoothly, no worse for wear. In all three of these cases, failure plays a critical role. Success sometimes means getting it right on the 52nd try, or trying lots of low-risk things before committing more resources to one bigger thing. And success sometimes means creating the stability to try something weird, and assuring that failure leads to learnings rather than crisis. Now, this is a talk about prototyping for casual games, but it's also a talk about redefining what failure means and how building and nurturing a culture of prototyping can allow companies to fail successfully and create the best environment for success to occur. What I'm proposing is a system, structure, process for exploring failure early and often. And because all good methods need a name, I'm calling this the 4F method, failing fast to find the fun. Thanks to Mitch Zamora, who provided the clever name. The process is primarily inspired by my time working in the Pop Labs prototyping group at PopCap. Together with a single engineer, we developed 4 different prototypes, iterating, testing, and deciding for ourselves when it was time to walk away from each and move on to the next thing. The 4th of those prototypes tested extraordinarily well, and was further developed by a team of 10 and soft-launched in Canada in 2015. And though ultimately not successful, I learned a lot from all of our prototypes and the lab as a whole. And this process is a loop because we need to get it out of our heads that design, exploration, prototyping, development is a linear process, an escalator leading to an inevitable shipped product, when in fact it should be a series of circles. And at any point in the process, there needs to be consideration for whether it's time to loop back. Moving forward should never be the assumption. The escalator doesn't always lead somewhere good. And like my experience in Pop Labs, 4F is based around creative partnerships, a designer and an engineer in close collaboration tackling problems together. And I view this as a true equal partnership. The engineer is not there simply to execute the designer's grand vision. The work produced is a synthesis of both the creative and technical. And like any relationship, communication, trust, and mutual respect are critical. Depending on the prototype's need, you may need an artist as a third or a second engineer, but keeping the team small is important to ensure that everyone has a voice in the process while still maintaining cohesion. And every time this team loops together, they become better at the process, and their working relationship improves. And like any team, the more experience they have working together, the stronger their output. And 4F can give a team a lot of experience in a very short amount of time. Now, 4F always begins in the box. And from the box, one or several ideas can come together to form a plan for a playable prototype that can be built in a short amount of time. Once built, the prototype is tested with a variety of audiences, and from there the team determines whether they want to iterate further on the current prototype or shelve it in favor of something else. The box is where all of your neat ideas for games live, and it's a critical part of 4F. It limits the dependency on any one idea and allows those involved to constantly chew on the other ideas in the backs of their minds. The box encourages a playful approach to ideation that doesn't put too much pressure on any one thing to be the thing. Keeping the box filled allows you to more easily put down things that aren't working, because a lot of stuff isn't going to work. And it's also admission that some ideas aren't really fully cooked, and they need time to percolate before they're ready to come out of the box. Now, when I think about the concept of the box, I think of Pixar, and how in a single lunch meeting back in 1994, John Lasseter, Andrew Stanton, Pete Docter, and Joe Ranft generated the rough ideas that would become the studio's next 4 films. And the ideas they generated weren't fully cooked, but they were varying approaches to ideation. Rendering humans in CG was still a technical challenge, so A Bug's Life was planned as a story devoid of people. The Secret Lives of Toys worked well for Toy Story, so Monsters, Inc. was about the secret lives of the monsters under your bed. Finding Nemo came from Andrew Stanton's sympathy for the fish in his dentist's aquarium, and WALL-E started with the character himself, this idea of a sad robot left alone on a planet, still doing the same menial tasks he'd been programmed to perform centuries earlier. And in the same way, what's in the box aren't complete prototypes or even fully formed ideas. They're pieces of interaction or sources of inspiration, open questions or clever solutions to constraints and limitations. Maybe it's a certain toy in the children's play area at IKEA, the iPhone's slide to interlock interaction, leaping across rooftops in Saints Row 4, the idea of a casual Metroidvania, busting your own tables at restaurants, rock climbing, goats, Tinder. The box is there to constantly tickle your brain, to be played with, twisted around, mashed together. Some things might bubble to the top. A game mechanic will begin to form in your mind. At that point, you have to determine what to build and how you're going to build it. And planning for a prototype is about determining the shortest path to something playable that proves a concept or hypothesis. But the proof is not going to come from those familiar with its genesis. That proof has to come from actual players who have no idea what you're trying to do or the thinking behind what's in front of them. And the problem with most prototyping I've seen in casual games is that the prototypes are built for the developers themselves, and sharing those prototypes with anyone other than their creators involves a lot of pre-explanation and caveats. What's more, those prototypes rarely stand enough on their own to be shown to people outside of the team or company. And criticism of the prototype can often be explained away with, oh, we can clarify that with a tutorial, or I probably didn't explain this well, or well, the visuals would make that part feel a lot more satisfying. A key part of this process is you're not building prototypes for yourselves. You're building them for an actual audience, and you want the feedback to focus as much as possible on the things you're trying to test rather than the rough edges. This means that your prototype needs to stand on its own. The entirety of what players are evaluating has to be contained within the game itself. So when I say a prototype needs to be playable, I also means that it needs to be usable. A playable prototype for a casual game does its job best if you can hand it to an uninitiated player, watch them figure out how to play without needing to explain anything, and witness their honest and immediate reactions to the experience. I'll give a quick example. So these are two versions of a prototype that the developer Decky Cost helped me build. The mechanic is identical in both, but the one on the left is lacking a cascade effect when cards are removed from the board, making it unclear what happened to the selected cards and where the new cards come from. And the animation here is critical to the player's understanding of how their interaction affects the environment. The cascade isn't polish. It's actually integral to the prototype doing its job. At the same time, it's still important to turn the prototype around quickly and get it in front of players as soon as possible. And this means cutting corners as much as you can while still having a presentable, usable facade. Reuse existing code, grab art from the internet. If you're in a large company, borrow what you need from other studios. One prototype we built at PopCap was made almost entirely of assets from the Facebook game Pet Society. And borrowing those assets from the Playfish studio within EA allowed us to build the prototype quickly. Also, the player character we used was from a Google image search. Once your prototype is built, it's time to do the hard thing and have people play it, to watch them play it, and collect copious amounts of feedback. And this is going to require being confident, thick-skinned, and tight-lipped. Your team's internal notes and feedback are valuable, but never in isolation. Consider your subjective feelings on your own work as a hypothesis to be proven or disproven by exposing the work to wider and wider audiences. The closer someone is to you and the project, the more that bias will affect their evaluation. The most honest feedback that you can receive is from people who don't know you and who are reacting solely to the game that's in front of them. That said, you should take advantage of any opportunity you have to actually observe someone playing your game. Ask them to think out loud, narrate their experience, what they're noticing, what they like, what frustrates them, what confuses them. See how they react to different moments in the game. Watch the screen to see what they're doing and what they're trying to do and how it relates to the way they're reacting. And during all of this, and I mean this in the kindest way possible, keep your mouth shut. Don't explain, don't get defensive, just observe. Because the more that you say, the more it's going to color their experience. For playtesting outside of your social sphere, I strongly recommend usertesting.com. It lets you upload builds and expose them to targeted demographics, complete with recorded footage of their gameplay and survey questions. And user testing was indispensable for us within Pop Labs collecting external feedback on our prototypes. And they have tools that make it easy to timestamp your notes and create highlight videos from the playtests. All the feedback that you receive needs to be collected, categorized, and considered. And evaluating the feedback means asking a few questions. What's working? What isn't? What could we iterate on? And most importantly, do we keep going or do we try something new? And here we arrive at a critical part of the process, the decision whether to iterate on what you have or put it down and go back to the box. And there's always a chance that after one iteration you'll quickly determine that the concept doesn't pan out, and the decision to put it down will be easy. Most likely, however, it's going to be hard to make that kind of call. Most of the time you're going to think, well, maybe if we tried this, it'll work. And this is again where the sunk cost fallacy rears its ugly head. Iteration on any concept takes time, and walking away from something you've invested in always feels like admitting defeat. It feels like wasting work. But this is where the box is important, because part of the decision to shelve or iterate is about whether you and the team still feel passionate and confident about what you're building, and whether there is something in the box that is tempting you, or some open question on another design that has clicked. Sometimes you're going to shelve something. Sometimes you're going to shelve something because you know it's not working. Sometimes you'll shelve because exploring how to make it work is costly and not worth the time. And sometimes you'll shelve something simply because something else caught your attention, and there's momentum and excitement behind that something new. And chasing something new can actually be incredibly fruitful. So after spending his first year as an indie dev building an ambitious tactical strategy game, my friend Eric Riedman switched gears to collaborate with game designer Dana Nelson on a co-op mobile title. But during a break in development, Eric wanted to try something he'd been toying with in his brain. So he took 2 weeks to build the first playable of Clone Drone in the Danger Zone. And the game's now in early access and has proven extremely popular with streamers. Clone Drone's quick success turned it into a full-time project for Eric, and has actually allowed him to bring on a second engineer to aid in its development. All because he had an idea that had been percolating, wanted to try it out, and had a path to do so quickly. And Eric's story illustrates the importance of both the shelf and the box, the value of a process that lets you put something down in favor of trying something else. And that's how it went too. And it's called a shelf for a reason. Projects on the shelf aren't dead and buried. They're displayed proudly as a record of progress and accomplishment. They're easily returned to, and they exist as reference material for both you and your peers. Because the metric for prototyping success is not how many projects you get greenlit, it's the number of things you've tried. A major part of the 4F process is celebrating everything you put down. It's a mark of experience and a moment of excitement as you pick up something else. And this isn't just about exploring new ideas. It's about building development mastery, creating team cohesion before teams ever enter production, fostering healthier relationships to critical feedback, and motivating teams to think different. But the process requires room to breathe and insulation from executive oversight as much as possible. Nothing being prototyped should be expected to go into full development or ship. Investing in R&D means investing in something separate from normal development expectations and pressures. The more pressure you put on every prototype to work, the more teams are going to feel a sunk cost in everything they try. And the more likely they are to fool themselves and others into thinking something's working, even when it's not, for the sake of moving it forward in order to hit some quarterly goal. But this also means teams need to be critical of each other and maintain a practice of honest critical feedback. The studio as a whole needs to demonstrate that it is capable of autonomy. And if you wait for someone higher up to tell you how to manage your time, you lose that autonomy. Now, I worry about our industry a lot for a variety of reasons, but games are my passion, and making games is what drives me. And I want our industry to be more open to exploring the full range of what games can be. And having that kind of exploration happening within casual games is extremely important, because casual games are for everyone. And I like to tell people that I make games for everyone, and it's about diversity and inclusion, but it's also about scale. More than any other part of the industry, casual games have the potential to reach the widest audiences. And they accomplish this by offering simplicity, approachability. They defy the prior games literacy that so many console and AAA games require as a prerequisite for enjoyment. When you make casual games, you are inviting the world to play. TM. We developers owe it to our players to bring delight to even the smallest moments of their day, to create playful opportunities to connect or reconnect with others, to make them smile even when they need it the most. And we can't devote so much of our trade to repeating the same patterns expecting different results. We need to move casual games forward. It's not just good for our players, it's good for business. Anyway, I hope you'll all join me in making better games and making games better. Thank you.
That was fabulous, and I think just bringing that kind of like failure thing to real sharp focus. The only thing I wonder about, and I'd like to know if your feeling is the same, the number of companies that invest in that space are still relatively small, I fear. But is this what the indie scene has been able to do? To just give us a space where we can do that ourselves, although we're taking the risk when we do that?
You know, it's interesting. My friends who have become independent developers, I love them. They're great people. But many of them jump into one immediate project, this darling that they have and what they want to invest their time into. And they'll spend 1 or 2 years just focused on one single project. And Eric's a really great example of someone who did that. His first year was on this tactical strategy game. And it was only when he made the decision to actually put it down, he was able to begin exploring things more loosey-goosey. Yeah. And that was really the moment that he was actually able to hit on success.
And I think we need to do more of that.
I agree.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again,